The world in which the European Union could thrive no longer exists. It is not even clear whether it has ever existed. Europeans wanted to live in a world ruled by rules, not by military power. A world in which the power did not grow out of the barrel of a gun. A world in which might did not result in right. The European Union, with its commitment to the rule of law and multilateralism, was a harbinger for a better world to come. Europe, many EU enthusiasts believed, demonstrated that one could rule with the power of example and persuasion, rather than the threat of violence. This was Europe's soft power that could and would shape the rest of the world. This confidence was understandable. It was Europe too, which exemplified the destructive power of interstate conflict. Europe did not merely give the world democracy, human rights and international law, but also the devastations of the First and the Second World War. The European project demonstrated that it was possible to turn mortal enemies into partners and even friends. First, in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, within Western Europe, and that is the story of the Franco-German reconciliation, and later, after 1989, even across the borders of the former Iron Curtain. After the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was no limit to Europe's ambition to remake the world in its own image. By 2014, at the latest, this hope was undermined by the Russian occupation of Crimea. On February 24, 2022, the hope for a Europe that is free, united, and at peace both with itself and its neighbors was destroyed by the full-blown invasion of Ukraine. To use Ivan Krastyev's description of this new predicament, we all live in Putin's world today. In such a world, the EU's soft power is rather limited. Europe's power of attraction worked in relation to nations of Central Europe. It worked rather well. They ended up being integrated into the European Union. To some extent, we could say it also worked in relation to Ukraine, strengthening the people's commitment to democracy and the rule of law. But it failed to work in relation to Russia. And even in relation to Ukraine, Europe's soft power wasn't sufficient in protecting the country against Russia. The European Union as an in-between experimental polity did not, and indeed could not, live up to the expectations it itself gave rise to, turning Ukraine into a thriving, prosperous and stable liberal democracy independent of Russia. The EU is not a military actor. In fact, its emphasis on soft or smart power facilitated and accelerated demilitarization of a number of its member states, particularly, of course, Germany. Related to this, European leaders had little awareness of the importance of strategy. Never-ending discussions about the EU as a geopolitical actor notwithstanding. The goal of European strategic autonomy remains elusive. There are two pictures that illustrate the EU's limitations rather well. One was taken on February 2014 on the main square in Kiev. It depicts the Ukrainian revolution of dignity, the so-called Maidan movement. Amongst fire and many Ukrainian flags, we see an EU flag in the middle. The flag which stands not merely for Ukraine's ambition to become a full member of the EU, an ambition that has been accelerated, intensified now, but also the commitment of Ukrainian people to the values that Europe stands for: democracy, human rights, political stability, and prosperity. The EU represents a promise for a better Ukraine, one that is well governed and empowers its citizens to pursue their lives in freedom and dignity. Now, fast forward to February the 1st, 2022. That is just a couple of weeks before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What we see here are the members of Verkhovna Rada, that is the Ukrainian parliament, showing the flag of countries and organizations supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia. There are flags here of the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Poland, the Czech Republic, Estonia, even Turkey, and of course NATO. Missing, however, are the flags of the European Union and its two major member states, France and Germany. The pictures nicely shows the growing gap between the expectations that the EU gave rise to and the limited capabilities it has had to deliver on these expectations. A great historian of Ukraine, Professor Timothy Snyder, was right to say that Ukraine has no future without Europe, but that Europe has also no future without Ukraine. Importantly, though, he said that in the immediate aftermath of the Maidan movement and the occupation of Crimea, that is in 2014. His warning was ignored then in the European capitals that matter, like Berlin, Paris, and yes, even Brussels. And so were similar warnings by governments and observers in Poland and other countries of Central and Eastern Europe. EU-Europe should not make the same mistake again. It is doubtful, I believe, whether Ukraine would even exist as a sovereign nation state today were it not for the robust military support of the United States, the United Kingdom, and a number of EU member states, such as Poland, in the early days of the invasion. Without their arms supplies, Ukrainians would have had very little chance to stand up to the aggressor. To be sure, as I said, the European Union is not a military actor, and thus its ability to help Ukraine was always going to be limited. Yet, it was the EU's de facto foreign minister, Josep Borrell, who promised Ukraine heavy weapons, even fighter jets, he said, just days after the invasion, a promise he was forced to disown shortly after. Time and again, the EU raises expectations it cannot fulfill. For a number of reasons, which are discussed with Professor Chris Pickerton in Prague and Professor Alexander Thiele in Berlin, I remain doubtful whether the EU can ever become a truly geopolitical actor, and even if it could, whether such a prospect would be desirable.